Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, a.k.a. Caliban, and I hate to oppose the wisdom of Winston Zeddemore, but in Starfleet, when someone asks you if you're a god, you say no! I'm joined on this episode by Millie Pettit. Mollie is a front-end data visualization engineer and designer and the events director for the Data Visualization Society. Mollie, welcome to the show.
Yeah, that's me. Hello. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Permission to come aboard granted. Today we'll be talking about Who Watches the Watchers, the fourth episode of the third season of Star Trek The Next Generation. The Prime Directive is Starfleet's most sacred doctrine, a principle of non-interference designed to protect less developed cultures from exploitation and cultural contamination by Starfleet personnel. It is a rule that Starfleet officers are tasked with upholding at any price, up to and including their own lives. The moral responsibility of allowing a species to develop into adulthood without interference seems clear. But what about those child species that are developing with antisocial or aggressive tendencies? What about species that without positive interference would never reach galactic adulthood? Amassing unlimited resources and then navel-gazing about the morality of their distribution would seem to be the ultimate trap for intergalactic liberalism, but the unintended consequences of societies meeting each other on unequal ground can be seen over and over again in the colonial history of Earth's nations, and presumably the histories of Federation member worlds. And the well-intentioned helping hand may cast the stone, which creates ripples that could capsize a fledgling society. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. First, Mollie, it's great to have you on board, and I always ask first-time guests to the show how they first discovered Star Trek. How did you become a Star Trek fan?
Yeah, so I think mine's probably different than most people. I think a lot of people kind of grew up with it, their parents watching it, and I think my mom might have been a fan, but I never really watched it as a kid.
Yeah.
By the time the reboot started in 2009, I'd still never really watched Star Trek. So like some of the first Star Trek was these reboot movies that came out, and I thought they were really fun. And there was a while after college where I was living with my brother, and he decided that he was going to start watching Star Trek from the very beginning, and I decided to join him on this journey. And we specifically found websites that had the order of air date of episodes coming out. So it wasn't just watching this series that, original, then animated, then, I guess those are still in order. Yeah. When it comes to like TNG and Deep Space Nine, I would be going back and forth between episodes to kind of go along with when they came out.
Okay.
So at first it really just started as like a fun thing to do with my brother, and kind of probably this completionist in me kept on going, and then I got hooked. And that's that. So now, eventually I watched all the episodes that had ever been made. I will admit the only ones I haven't seen are the most recent Discovery ones that have come out, so I got to catch up. But yeah.
That is, wow, what an undertaking that is. I have to try that on my next watch through, the air date. I guess if you're really hardcore, you'd go by calendar date. So you would start with just, Voyager at the Big Bang with the Q that wants to kill himself. And then, I guess, did we ever see the end of the universe in Star Trek? Maybe you would wrap it up with Discovery being in the 32nd century.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I think a lot of shows have the star dates. Some definitely, they're like, oh, I don't know when these are, but yes. But you could probably do that. In fact, there's the same website I use to watch in order of air date. You could switch it to an order of star date if you wanted. So.
Oh, okay. So I wonder how they handle the wide swaths of DS9 where they're like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about the star date.
Sure, some of those are guesses. Yeah.
I think as somebody who is a data scientist, it would be on you to as you're watching them go, okay, so they mentioned this, that must take place maybe let's say a week after the last one. So let's calculate a week out in the star date, and here's the approximate star date.
Sure, maybe you can even get it really into etymology and these words didn't come up at this point or
Sure. Yeah. Well, you are a data visualization engineer, and for any listeners who might be unfamiliar with what that entails, could you give us an idea of what you do and how it reaches into our everyday lives?
Yeah, sure. In fact, so often when I tell people what I do, they just kind of look at me like, what are you talking about? So, often what I try to do is tell them about data visualizations that they would certainly have interacted with at some point, whether or not those are the kind that I've created. So, for example, everybody and their mother, especially recently, has almost certainly looked at or played around with some sort of elections visualization.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're just, with the last week, they were just updating based on count votes. Updating based on vote counts and changing colors when one was won. So that's pretty simple. But also if you're looking at I know 5:30 in the past, I didn't really pay too much attention to this election, but in the past they've done these interesting kind of like interactive visualizations to look at the various paths to victory, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
So anyway, these are just like examples of data visualization that everybody has seen. But if you want to get really simple, like a bar chart is a data visualization. That could mean that you drew it or made it on Excel, or it could mean that you're using something in the front end to make it interactive so you can click around.
Right.
So it can be really simple, or it can be like really complex, or it can be like really creative and artsy, and I think that I was actually just having a discussion with someone recently about how like visualizations that are really easy to read are really good when you're trying to when people need to be able to read them and use the numbers to like make decisions or know a vote count or whatever.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to get people to feel something, the more creative visualizations that don't need to be quite so exact, but help evoke emotion, are the way to go. So there's a lot of ways that you can approach that.
That's interesting. I mean, 2020 has been a banner year for the fruits of data visualization with COVID numbers and rising temperatures, election results.
Yes. There's been a lot of interesting things in the world of data visualization with COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that you could sort of influence people's acceptance of data in the way that you present it. And people just seem poorly designed to assimilate data. I always think of the object lesson where you show a kid two glasses, one tall and thin and one short and wide, and you pour soda into both of them and say, which one do you want? The kid takes the tall one because the level of liquid looks higher, but it's less delicious soda than the wider glass that holds more. And of course, that result is rectified by experience. You drink all the soda fast and you go, oh no, there's more soda in the other glass. Got it. But data like climate change data, or as we've seen recently, election result maps, people can't seem to get their heads around what they're seeing means.
Oh yeah, totally. And there's a lot of kind of psychology behind it too, and and how you're representing things, and things that our brain are better at picking out or better at understanding versus I don't know, like pie charts or something, or a type of visualization that people pick on a lot. They're kind of not easy for brains to understand because you have all these angles. You're trying to like read and understand the difference between angles, which is not something we're good at. But being able to understand the difference between the space between where two bars end, we can grasp really easily, right? So and then I mean with the COVID data and there was something else you just mentioned.
Climate change, like warming trends. Yeah,
there's just a lot of data, and there's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of ways to like either intentionally or often unintentionally misrepresent what you're trying to show. Yeah.
I always think of those YouTube videos where they use like 3D graphics to represent, say, the national debt. You can write a big number down and it's like, okay, yeah, big number, got it. But then you see, in the visualization, like one block is $1,000 and then it pulls out and there's millions of blocks. It's so much higher than Mount Everest or whatever. And it better conveys the enormity to my brain, at least.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Data visualization definitely exists in the 24th century, but from what we see on screen, I'm not sure how far it's advanced. In most episodes of TNG, we get a scene in the conference room. Geordi goes to the screen at the end of the table and he says, okay, here's how much time we have left till the planet blows up, or here's what the crazy gas molecules look like. And even with all the data that they collect and the advanced display technology they possess, it ends up looking like a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, or kind of like those 90 hacker movies where it's just kind of like random,
Yeah.
Interesting thing, I wasn't even really in data at the time that I really got started in data visualization. I was a geologist in my past life. So, I hadn't ever really thought about it, but you're right. They're pretty bad.
Yeah, it's so weird. And to think that, people in the future have this amazing educational system, and so they would probably understand like tensors and calculus. So you could get pretty crazy with, I think, some of the things that you would represent. But of course, the people watching it in the 20th century maybe don't know all that stuff. And they've got holograms and view screens and holodecks and three-dimensional displays. I would have to assume that the medium in which you're presenting the data is going to affect how you can visualize it too.
Sure. And I think Star Trek also goes sometimes along this kind of like black box policy where it's like, it doesn't really matter what we're showing as long as we just explain it away the right way.
Yeah. Which, again, like primetime TV, you don't really have a choice. You can't lose your audience while you're explaining the problem.
I don't want to worry too much about being exact.
Right. Yeah. Good enough. The amount of data that they're analyzing is staggering as well, and especially in terms of what they need to comb through. They've got sensors that detect all forms of radiation. They see into subspace. They're taking things from, light years around them. Like, without organization in their presentation, it'd just be nonsense. It'd be a mountain of static.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, even a lot of these big companies today who are collecting massive amounts of data, the data feels insurmountable. So, I can't – then you imagine the kind of data they're dealing with, and it's just like orders of magnitude more complex and bigger.
Yeah. Data can handle it. Data, the character, I'm sure.
Yeah. So my Twitter banner used to be, I don't think most people who saw it got it, but they just like, oh, Mollie's a Star Trek fan. But my Star Trek banner used to be like a photo of Data towering over like a city. And the whole point is that he's big data.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah. There's a meme going around that I've seen recently where they say, trust data, not lore. And it's a picture of data and lore, side by side. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why did you pick this specific episode, Who Watches the Watchers, to discuss today?
Yeah. So it was just one of those episodes that stuck out to me as one that was really interesting. I actually didn't have a really terrible memory. I will watch an entire, series that I love, and then a year later basically be able to rewatch it and like enjoy it all over again because I've forgotten basically everything except for the really big picture. And for some reason, this episode is one of the episodes that stuck out, that I remember thinking was really interesting.
Yeah.
It kind of encapsulates like extremely, like beats you over the head with it. The most kind of like Roddenberry's vision of, how religion plays into the future. And so I think it's interesting, both, on its own, but I think it's like also interesting as like a representation of kind of how religion is viewed throughout Star Trek.
Yeah. I think that this episode in that way is just one of the episodes of what Star Trek really is. Like, it's half this hand-wringing, over these philosophical and moral issues, and the other half is like actors clambering over rocks in Renfest costumes, the Vasquez rocks. Like, it's just exactly encapsulates what Star Trek is.
Yeah, actually, that's something. I rewatched it again last month and then again last night, just to have it fresh. And something that we were chuckling about is like, no more in a show do you spend like 20 seconds just watch someone go up rocks. Like, okay, I'm watching you climb, and now I'm watching you watch that person, and now I'm watching you like.
Yeah.
Oh, TV has changed.
Yeah, it's changed quite a bit. Yeah. I've always liked the idea of the Prime Directive because to me it means that Starfleet is working. They're on the clock. Like, it's an amazing opportunity to fly among nebula and supernovae and meet cool aliens, but they have a responsibility. They're constrained in their actions, and it's for the ultimate greater good. And I have to say, though, that the Prime Directive as written seems nearly impossible for them to uphold, and they break it all the time on the show.
Oh.
If they really wanted to not interfere. Yeah, all the time. If they really wanted to not interfere with anybody, they should just stay home.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Don't go looking for people if you don't want to interfere with their lives.
The best way to not interfere is just to stay at home. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah.
But of course, that contradicts the explorer, the outward bound spirit of our heroes of Star Trek and what the series has always been based on at the beginning.
Sure. Yeah.
Another thing I like about this episode is that it's in TNG's stellar third season. You can make a case for season 4 or 5 being the best TNG season, but season 3 is my favorite TNG season.
Yeah, I don't have a specific favorite season of TNG, but except to say that 1 and 2 are not it.
Yeah, I think that's probably generally accepted.
Actually, a while ago, when I first started as a data scientist at this company, they would encourage us to do blog posts, and I did just like a look at comparing the amount of lines Wesley Crusher spoke in an episode to the rating of that episode to show that like it's correlated, or I mean, yeah, that there's a correlation. Granted, like that doesn't mean causation. It could be like different writers. It could be, whatever. But in my heart of hearts, I like to think it's just because Wesley was annoying. So
that is that's so interesting, and we just talked about Wesley Crusher actually on a recent episode, and I used your metric in talking about the relation of Wesley Crusher's dialogue to whether the episode, the IMDb rating.
Oh, nice.
So thanks for your research. Yeah, it's already gone to good use.
I mean, like, I guess you could also argue too that like I think it's not an uncommon trend for Star Trek series to start okay.
Yeah.
Or almost bad, and then like get better after the second season.
Yeah.
At least, especially with like the older shows, I feel like that's a common trend. And I don't know if that means that they just need some time to like figure out the characters. I mean, like Spock was like green or something at first, right? And like I feel like in the first 3 episodes of the original series, he like had feelings until they decided he didn't. So, it's like they just need some time to figure things out sometimes. I guess.
Dial that in, yeah. It was ironic because the episode we were talking about was The Game, which of course is the episode with the most Wesley Crusher lines because it's basically a Wesley starring episode, and that is actually an okay episode or a pretty good episode. So it's like the exception that proves the rule, I guess.
Sure. I mean, I would love to comment, but like I said, man, my memory, I have no idea. In fact, like in order to prepare for this, I rewatched Who Watches the Watchers a couple times, and I watched a bunch of other episodes that I felt like related in some way to kind of this discussion on like religion, because my brain when it comes to specifics, it's just trash.
Yeah, and there are a lot of specifics in the 800 plus episodes of the Star Trek franchise. Yeah.
Yes.
And we'll get more into that in a little bit. But first, we're talking the TNG episode, Who Watches the Watchers, the 4th episode of the 3rd season of TNG. It first aired on October 16th of 1989. It was written by Richard Manning and Hans Beimler. Manning and Beimler served as co-producers on TNG's 3rd season. They also worked as story editors on season 1 and executive script consultants on season 2 of the show. They contributed a number of scripts for the 3rd season of TNG, and they co-wrote the episode Paradise for DS9. Manning also served as a writer and producer on the series Fame, Tech War, and one of my favorite sci-fi shows, Farscape, which I bring up far too often on my Star Trek podcast. Hans Beimler would go on to write for DS9 and would team with series writer and producer Ira Stephen Bear to pen many scripts for that show. The episode was directed by Robert Weimer. This is Weimer's first directing job for the franchise. He'd go on to direct 7 more episodes of TNG and an episode of DS9. He was also a writer, and he wrote and directed films like The Night Train to Kathmandu and Anna to the Infinite Power. He passed away in 2014. The stardate for this episode is 43173.5, and your assignment, Mollie, if you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of Who Watches the Watchers.
Oh, no. Okay. I'll do my best. Starfleet anthropologists are studying the Mintakans. The holographic wall hiding them from them fails. Liko, a local, sees this, investigates, gets shot, gets injured. Crusher cures him. And attempts to wipe his memory, but that completely fails. So now he believes in the Picard as his godlike figure. Starfleet laments this as, quote, they've sabotaged the civilization's achievement in abandoning their belief in the supernatural. People say, have I failed you in some way? Way too many times. Picard nearly dies stupidly to prove a point. But as with most Star Trek episodes, things resolve quickly and happily at the end.
Yes, and Picard even gets a blanket out of it.
Yeah, I'm very aware that was definitely more than 25. Hopefully that was a good synopsis.
That was a complete synopsis, yeah.
Yeah.
That was great. Well, here's some interesting facts from our memory banks about this episode, and feel free to jump in with any comments you might have here. We should probably start with the title of the episode. Who Watches the Watchers, or Quis Custodiet Ipsos Custodes, is a quotation from the satires of the Roman poet Juvenal, not to be confused with the rapper Juvenile of Back That Ass Up fame. The original context of the quote relates to marital fidelity, but it has generally come to refer to the problem of accountability of people in power and the responsibility of self-governance of a nation, government, or ruling class, as well as its military or law enforcement forces. And I think that applies well to this episode. The title of the TOS episode, Bread and Circuses, also comes from a Juvenal quotation. Exteriors for the episode were shot at the now iconic Vasquez Rocks, as seen on episodes of TOS and other Star Trek episodes. Production on this episode was overseen by Michael Wagner, who contributed to scripts for the first few episodes of the third season. Wagner was brought in to replace Maurice Hurley as showrunner after Hurley left at the end of the second season. However, Wagner found that the job of showrunner was not for him, and this was his last episode on the series. He was replaced by Michael Piller, who would go on to co-create DS9 and Voyager and remain a guiding force for Trek TV and film until his departure from the franchise in the late 90s. This episode contains the final reference to Dr. Pulaski on the show. She is obliquely referenced by Moriarty when he returns in his episode Ship in a Bottle, but she's never named again in the franchise until she gets a page from Starfleet Medical in the Voyager finale, Endgame. And I love how even in this episode, she's only being mentioned so we can confirm that Dr. Crusher knows how to do the super cool memory wiping technique, which she totally screws up, by the way, or maybe it just wouldn't work anyway. It's like they're like, please forget Pulaski was ever on the show. Are you a Pulaski fan?
No. I mean, you know, she's fine. Like, I don't have anything against
sure
playing her or anything, but it's kind of like, it's like you have this like fabulous like Beverly Crusher, and then they just replaced her for a season. I think I heard it had something, I assume something to do with like contract negotiations or something. I don't actually know the story. I bet you do, but it was like nice to have her back.
Yeah,
Crusher back.
It was a situation where Gates McFadden, I think, wasn't getting along with the people in charge, the production, like Maurice Hurley. And also she had a shot at, she was in a couple movies, and so she kind of went off and did that. And then they got the actress to play Dr. Pulaski as kind of a reference to the original series, because she was on the original series a couple times. But yeah, it was an experiment that maybe didn't quite work.
Yeah, I feel like they were trying to channel Bones with her,
you know? Yeah.
Kind of just like this cranky, I don't know, doctor. Like, that's what it seemed to me anyway.
I think the things I love about her are the things I love about Bones. I think that's why I kind of have an affection for her. Speaking of Dr. Crusher, this is the first appearance of her longer lab coat, which she would continue to use for the rest of the series and the film Generations. This is the first appearance of the Mintakan tapestry that Picard gets from Nuria, and it would be seen in many subsequent episodes of TNG and in every Star Trek film, Star Trek The Next Generation film, except Star Trek Nemesis. This is also the first time that we see Commander Riker go undercover as an alien, which he would do again in First Contact, Frame of Mind, and Preemptive Strike. It never goes well when Riker goes undercover. Something always goes wrong.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, we never see him come back and he's tearing off, silly putty from his forehead, and he's like, thumbs up, A-okay, everything's fine. He's always getting captured and seduced by, alien doctors, or he's getting thrown into an alien insane asylum, and he has to deal with that. And so, yeah, leave Riker on the ship, I think. No undercover work for him.
Is that not on par with basically anyone who's doing away mission? I mean, rarely do people just like have a jaunt in town and like come back unscathed, right? Like...
Geordi has to fall down a hole, or Data gets blown up or something like that. Yeah, that's why we have a show. Yeah, right. But I mean, just from like, maybe there's a million off-screen missions that went fine, but just by like his record, you think they'd be like, you sit this one out, Riker, that's fine. Yeah. Let's talk about the guest stars in this episode. Catherine Lee Scott appears as Nuria. Scott is a perennial TV guest star, having appeared on many TV shows since her acting debut in the late 60s. She got her start on the ABC soap Dark Shadows, where she had a recurring role as Maggie Evans, as well as playing other incidental roles. At 77, she's still active today, having appeared last year in an episode of The Blacklist. Ray Wise appears as Liko. Wise would also later play the role of Arturis in the 4th season Voyager episode Hope and Fear. Wise is a longtime character actor for TV and film. He's known for his role as Leland Palmer in the ABC drama Twin Peaks, as well as the role of Leon in RoboCop and his role as the Devil on the CW series Reaper. He got his start on the Broadway stage and in soaps. His first TV role was an episode of Charlie's Angels, and his film debut was in Wes Craven's 1982 comic adaptation of Swamp Thing. And I thought that it was interesting that he plays a character named Leland Palmer in Twin Peaks, and in this episode, one of the scientists' name, the guy that gets captured, is Palmer. And it's a total coincidence.
Oh.
There's no connection at all, but it's just one of those weird things.
That's interesting. And the first thing I thought of when I started watching this episode is, oh, that's Robin's dad from How I Met Your Mother.
Oh, yeah, that too.
That was my immediately, connection.
Yeah, right. With that weird haircut, yeah. James Green appears as Baron. Green would return to the franchise in the 6th season DS9 episode The Reckoning, as well as the 5th season Voyager episode 1159. Green was an original founding member of Elia Kazan's Lincoln Center Repertory Company in New York City, and he made his Broadway debut in 1951 in a production of Romeo and Juliet. He's best known for his role as Davy, the elevator operator on the sitcom The Days and Nights of Mollie Dodd, as well as Uncle Moodry in the Fox series Alien Nation, and he appeared as Fielding Milton, the oldest member of the fictional Pawnee City Council on Parks and Recreation. He passed away in 2018 at the age of 91. And Pamela Siegel, married name Adlin, appears as Oji. Adlin has gone on to appear in numerous films, TV shows, and voice roles. She made her film debut in Grease 2 and has appeared in the films Say Anything, The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, and Bumblebee, as well as recurring roles on the TV shows Californication, Better Things, and the FX series Louie, for which she was also a writer and producer. As a voice actress, she's appeared as Ashley Spinelli on the series Recess, and she's the voice of Bobby Hill on King of the Hill, for which she won an Emmy Award in 2002 for outstanding voiceover performance in the episode Bobby Goes Nuts. It's so surprising to me sometimes to learn what else actors do. You tend to think of somebody as, you see Ray Wise on Twin Peaks, and he's the menacing character. Sure. And then he goes off and he's on How I Met Your Mother, and he's funny, and finding out that the lady who played OG in Who Watches the Watchers is Bobby Hill blew my mind. And she's done a million other voiceover roles too. She's all over the place.
Yeah, I had no idea. That's awesome.
Let's talk about the episode itself and of course the issues that arise in the episode. The Prime Directive is mentioned in every Star Trek series, and it's suggested in Enterprise, but it's never actually been recited or appeared on screen. There are a few secondary sources that have provided their own examples. One of those actually made it into a prop that was used in Pike's office for Star Trek Into Darkness, but we don't actually focus on it on screen. And the text of this version of the Prime Directive, or General Order 1, comes from a supplement for the FASA Star Trek role-playing game from the early 80s, I think, a while back. And it reads, as the rights of each sentient species to live in accordance with the normal cultural evolution is considered sacred, no Starfleet personnel may interfere with the normal and healthy development of alien life and culture. And I love the fact that even though, as we see in this episode, the Federation seems to eschew religious belief, or at least they don't mandate it, the language of its general orders for Starfleet are very like commandments or religious edicts, and the cultural evolution of species is described in the Prime Directive as sacred. Benevolent non-interference could be seen as their religion in a sense.
I've never thought of it that way.
It's something that they hold, just getting rid of religion, or I guess getting rid of superstition at least, because I imagine that the religious tradition must exist in the 24th century still, means that they aren't just yeah, whatever, man, just fly around and do whatever. It's almost been replaced with this codified, list of humanist rules.
Sure. Yeah. I have thoughts on two different thoughts on that. Yeah. One is that it's clear that religion didn't actually go away in Star Trek. Mm-hmm. Especially when you look at the prophets. I think it's just treated a little bit differently, right? It's there are these beings that have a lot of powers, and some people maybe worship them, but others just see them as beings with a lot of powers.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of portrayed a lot more, not necessarily in like, well, when they're talking about religions that already exist, right? It's not like those religions are looked down on.
Yeah.
Like the Bajorans aren't looked down on because they have this religion with the prophets. But like Sisko also has a relationship with the prophets, but isn't necessarily worshiping them, right?
Yeah.
He's just like, he just knows them. Well, he's, you know, the emissary, whatever. He gets to talk to them. He looks to them for guidance. So it's like, what makes something a god to one person worthy of worship versus just like a being with a lot of powers is a whole thing. And like religion also like keeps coming up within Star Trek. Like there's like chapels and stuff, but I partially wonder, like even in original series, I partially wonder how much of that is like a clear decision, or just like the religion is so embedded in a lot of our society that even if you're trying to create a society that doesn't have it, you might forget like, funerals and marriages might not be in a chapel.
Yeah.
Like I didn't, you know, and so, yeah.
Or possibly a concession to the, you know, God-fearing audience of the late 60s. Like if Kirk as a ship captain is going to marry two people, then it's, you know, now we need to build a set or redress the mess hall set to be a chapel. What I find fascinating about the Bajoran faith is that there seems to be, and maybe this is reflective of other religions in the 24th century, I don't know, but there seems to be a removal of the supernatural or spiritual in that sense side. Like Kira has flown through the wormhole. I guess she gets possessed by a Parwraith at one point, but like she seems to understand that the prophets are aliens, you know, they are beings. Yeah. But if they're alien beings that are invisible and everywhere at the same time and all powerful, then what's the difference really? Like Sisko could go on a tear and go to Bajor and go, they're just aliens, they're not gods or whatever. But to the Bajorans, they're like, it's the same thing. Like they still watch over us and they affect our destiny. Like you tell me what the difference is there, whether they're supernatural or what have you.
Yeah, I think, right. It's like if you take away the label of God, then is that person is that being any different?
Yeah.
Like they're still being with powers. And I think that like, it doesn't come down to simply whether or not,
I like where you're going. I like where you're going.
I think, I'm trying to think of how to like word this. I think it partially comes down to one, whether or not people, not just whether or not they believe they exist, right?
Yeah.
But whether or not they decide that they're worthy of worship or
devotion,
beings that they need to kind of try to guess at, what do you want from me? What do I need to do to make you happy? There's also this like assumption with a god that gods are assumed to have an interest in us, right? They're assumed to have this like plan for our lives.
Yeah.
Whereas the godlike creatures in Star Trek are pretty disinterested and are kind of just doing their own thing. Yeah. So like some of the I'll say godlike creatures, like people or beings with a lot of power. Sometimes they're trying to be helpful, right? Like with the prophets, like they're trying to help guide. And sometimes they're just trying to like have fun and like they're toying with humans because they think it's like entertaining or because they want to study us or use us to get something. I think a lot of it comes down to like this like assumed interest in us and having a plan for us and are worshiping them or not. And trying to curry favor or not.
Yeah, and with humanity, you know, seizing its own destiny to a greater degree in the Star Trek universe, then that need for a guiding force probably recedes, you know, in the minds of people in the Federation. With a character like Q, you kind of get it both ways because he is the trickster who's playing with people, but as we learn, you know, in the finale of TNG, ultimately he's been a guide the entire time, and he gives that last test where he's like, okay, you guys passed. Like, you know, I know I came on strong before, but maybe you guys got something, you know, keep
I guess you're worth having around.
Yeah. I won't wipe you out. Yeah. But like TNG goes really hard on the, we don't do that sort of thing anymore.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to note like its place in Star Trek and the times in which it was created. I think Star Trek's view of religion has softened since then, certainly since DS9. And then I thought it was very interesting that recently, you know, on the second season of Discovery, they go to this planet where there are Earthlings who have been transplanted to this other planet, and they're observing a religion. And we learn that like Pike's father was he was at least studying religion, if not like an ordained minister himself. And all the sort of anti, like, oh, we don't need that, we've got science and logic, all those typical Star Trek lines they put into the mouth of Michael Burnham, the character who was raised by Vulcans and raised to be logical and to believe in logic. And so it almost seemed like they were sort of pushing that out to this character to let her say all those normal things, but then also show that, like, no, there's a depth of spirituality that still exists in some people in the Federation, and that's totally accepted.
Yeah, well, I think another thing here too is, like, I think there's a difference, like Star Trek, like Starfleet recognizes the difference between acknowledging these beings that are powerful and having a sort of mysticism around something that they don't have any proof of, right? Yeah. So I think that is maybe where the big difference is like when they're able to interact with like Q and the prophets and, any of these creatures, like they're able to interact with them and and even ask them things or whatever. Whereas I think the thing that they see really detrimental in this episode is that, you have to make a lot of assumptions about, if you're assuming that there is this like supernatural being, but you don't have any way, you're just guessing a lot of the time, and you don't really have a way to understand like what to do. Like there's this quote that I wrote down that Troy says that, like, are you sure this is what he wants? That's the problem with the believing in a supreme being, trying to determine what he wants. Yeah. And so I think that is maybe where there's like a difference, right? Yeah. Between like these beings they're interacting with versus like just trying to explain things they don't understand. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't expect to be talking about religion so much, but I think it totally fits. And just the idea of Troy as somebody from a more quote unquote advanced society, giving them that insight about gods or religion and why you might want to not put so much faith in them. Of course, without a benevolent seeming God to guide your steps, you have to take on the responsibility yourself. And sure. I think that's what, the idea of the Prime Directive is. The Prime Directive would seem to be a societal expression of the philosophy of utilitarianism,
sure.
Doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people.
Yeah, and sorry if I sidetracked you. Like when I watched back this episode, this is like everything that I was thinking about. I was like, oh, this is so interesting in this like bigger picture way. Yeah, the Prime Directive, something that I find really actually funny about the Prime Directive in this episode is that like Picard breaks the Prime Directive all the time for the greater, like I think Prime Directive is one of those rules that you should have so that you know when to break it. It's like you should most of the time follow it, but like become really attuned to when it doesn't make sense. And so the thing that's really funny about this is he breaks it all the time for good reason, but then he just like wants to let this guy die.
Yeah,
yeah. It's like, okay, that doesn't seem very Picard.
Kind of
whatever.
Picking and choosing, at will. And of course, any philosophy that becomes totally rigid is like not a good philosophy.
Right.
Utilitarianism comes prepackaged with one of its most simple instantiations, the trolley problem, where, let's face it, somebody's going to get run over by a train car here. And at least on paper, Picard is, at the outset, fine with at least one guy getting crushed.
Sure. Yeah. If he thinks that the alternative is, harming... Like, if you view any contamination to a society as, like, actually harming them, then in his view, it could have been that, like, we're about to harm this entire society, which is a lot of people, so, like, screw that one guy.
Yeah, right. And one of the most famous refrains in Star Trek is, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one.
Sure.
But that's, of course, framed in the context of sacrificing one's self to satisfy those needs, where in the case of the Prime Directive, it's sacrificing the current happiness of an undeveloped culture for the presumed greater good of both that culture and the galactic culture as a whole. And that's pretty, that's a high and mighty position to take, looking down on these little people on their planet. It's not to suggest that our heroes are cool with running people over. I mean, they're constantly struggling with the dilemma that's being presented. And that's why it's such a great device for TV drama, watching our characters pull their hair out week after week over the issue.
Yeah, I mean, because I think like deep down they want to help everyone. Like they want to just be like, here, let me help you. Let me give you this big like hug and welcome you.
Yeah.
And, give you what you need and help you to not suffer, you know, because it's like nobody wants to see other people suffering and seeing people, you know, a civilization that is dying of something that we, you know, have plenty of cures for can feel like you're letting them suffer. So like it makes total sense to me that there would be this constant struggle to want to break this directive.
Yeah, there's an episode of Enterprise, which is like the first time that we sort of address that concern. I think it's called Dear Doctor. And on it, there's like two species on this that share this planet. And one is very advanced, but they have this degenerative disease. And the other is not so advanced. And they actually act as kind of like a client or like almost slave class to the advanced one. And Archer is sort of like, I mean, do we help? Clearly the other race is dying. Do we support the race that's developing? And he has to just kind of fly away at the end and not do anything, and everybody feels totally crappy about it.
Yeah,
and they should.
I mean, it's also, yeah, I mean that also kind of parallels. Now I can't remember the name of the of them, but in Discovery, there's that issue, right, with the culling of the the
Kelpians.
Yes, the Kelpians.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. Yeah.
But then, of course, it turns out that the oppressive race are like these evil goo monsters, and it's like, well, screw those guys.
Yeah, screw the goo monsters. No one can be sympathetic to a goo monster. Yeah.
It's such a good dramatic device. It really surprises me that it seems almost completely limited to Star Trek. Like most space sci-fi is not as inherently moral as Trek, at least not to the same degree. No. I think Doctor Who is one of the only other sci-fi shows I can think of in which the characters are constantly faced with the question if it's right to them to interfere.
Sure.
There's the Orville, I guess, which is, Star
Trek.
Trek.
Yeah. I mean, I think in Doctor Who, it's like partially like, do we have the right to interfere? But also like, if we interfere, are we going to F things up for ourselves?
Oh, yeah. there's a literal temporal authority, the flow of time. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. In reality, the Prime Directive, it condones a lapse in the presumed moral imperative to help anybody, who's in need in order to support the greater good. And Dostoevsky addresses this in The Brothers Karamazov when the brothers are talking and one asks another if he'd be okay with the building of a quote, edifice of human destiny that would give everybody peace and rest, but it would require the torture and death of an innocent child. And one child's life versus the utopian future of mankind, needs of the many outweigh the needs of the kid. Yeah, right. And of course, it's not presented as something that's easily answered, but if it's a hypothetical and we're saying like peace for humanity forever, and and Heidi, it seems like Heidi's gonna go.
Yeah, and these kind of like trolley problem type things, because you mentioned trolley problem earlier, they get really interesting, right? Because there's like, if it's just like, oh, I pull a lever and I make it so one guy dies instead of 5, that sounds really easy. But like, if I have to like push somebody into the way of the train, then it feels a lot harder. Or like sometimes it goes even as far as like, the whole surgery thing where it's like, okay, well, you could kill that patient and give the organs of that patient to these 5 people. Would you do it?
Yeah.
It's like, well, hell no. Like no surgeon would do that. Yeah. But it like breaks down and gets complicated like so quickly.
And Picard and the Enterprise have the biggest and easiest lever of them all. They're literally orbiting above. They can't see the faces of these people. Their technology and their privilege gives them the most removed perspective ever. And yet, so I've often said that like the altruism of our characters on Trek with all their resources and weapons and privilege, their altruism is like the most fictional technology on the show. The idea that we give these people all these things and immediately they want to turn around and give it to everybody else. Like that's, it makes for a good show, but gosh, I wonder if real humanity could be that way.
Yeah. I don't know. I tend to think humanity is a little worse than like it reminds me of, this is not Star Trek related, but like I recently was watching The Boys, and it's reality where if superheroes were real and they just are total jerks, and it's like I think that might be right. I think that if a bunch of people had a bunch of power, more of them than not would kind of be like a-holes with it. But like, yeah, it'd be great if Star Trek were the reality of the future. I hope for that. Like, I like to like hope for like goodness in humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, do you ever think about Star Trek in like a Fermi paradox kind of way? Like maybe we're being observed and some Picard's going to come down and save us all right before someone blows us up or something?
That, or like Picard has, an alien Picard has seen us and went, "Ooh, no. Let's come back in 1,000 years." Yeah.
Yeah, they're not ready.
The cosmic zoo principle. Speaking of comics, it reminds me of this debate of the conclusion of Watchmen, the graphic novel, and spoilers for Watchmen if you've somehow not, managed to read it or see the film. But the ostensible villain of the piece, Ozymandias, sacrifices millions of lives in order to save billions on a large-scale version of the trolley problem. But Rorschach, who is nominally an objectivist character, essentially a libertarian, is not comfortable with Ozymandias' moral math, and he thinks the truth should be known, and ultimately he dies for that belief in a very non-objectivist way. And on the subject of objectivism, I should just note that Alan Moore wrote the character of Rorschach as a refutation of objectivism. But as a crime fighter, Rorschach saw the world in a very objectivist terms of absolute good and bad, and he was comfortable being the ultimate arbitrator of that good and bad.
Yeah, I've never actually watched the show or read those comics, but I've been told by many people that I should, so it's on my list.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And of course, who watches The Watchmen? That's what we're doing right now. What do you think? In your opinion, is the Prime Directive ultimately a positive or negative force?
I think it's positive. I mean, I think they're just trying to find the balance.
Yeah.
I think that when, you're put in this position where you have, like, okay, so these people that have been talking, see them as these very powerful beings. And maybe they're just powerful because, like, over time they've invented this technology. But you could still see that as making them more powerful, whether or not it's something they were born with or something they created.
Yeah.
And when you're in this position of power, you could easily help to a detriment or, go in the other direction. And I think the Prime Directive is their way of just trying to find the balance with it all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the balance is, and that's the real issue, what's how far in each direction do you go? I've vacillated wildly on this issue throughout my fandom of Star Trek. And ultimately, I'd like to think that I'm a utilitarian in my approach to issues like this, but the events of this last year have really made me second guess that. I live in Minneapolis, and for years, we've had issues with the police, with racial profiling, over-policing, the training of officers to see their job as a war, and it's resulted in many deaths over the years, culminating in the murder of George Floyd in May. And for years, the city said that they were working on it. For years, they pumped more money and resources into the police department without changing the culture at all. And you can say that riots and property destruction are immoral and criminal and should be avoided, but I'd say that they put an exclamation point on the issue that we've been complaining about and protesting about for years. And I think sometimes the good of the people means not following the rules. It means disrupting things.
Sure. I mean, but like, okay, put yourself in I agree. But put yourself, like, let's say there's a Picard above us and he's seeing this happening, right? And he could either swoop down and try to like fix things and be like, you guys are being like stupid about this. Like, stop hurting people unnecessarily. Like, stop, maybe make some fixes in, what is the word I'm looking for? Oh my God, I'm brain dead. Reform, how maybe police are trained to help deter some of this. I could also see, though, like if there was a Picard looking down and be like, ooh, they're in a really, like, a place in history that kind of sucks. There's a lot of bad things happening. But in order for them to learn from it, they have to, I can't intervene. They just have to struggle through it.
Part of being in that role or putting yourself in that role is maintaining a belief that your assumptions are correct. Like Picard and Starfleet have to assume that the galaxy and the way it develops is how they see it. And going back to data management, like for the Federation to be so confident that it's okay to let a species die when their planet explodes or gets hit by a comet, that means that they must have some system of projecting the effects of letting this or that race live, some kind of quantum leap in social science modeling. But of course, we never see that on screen. They often talk about repairing. I think more in like TOS and early TNG, they'll go to a planet where some idiot from Earth has brought, a copy of Mein Kampf, or he's set up a TV studio or something like that. And in cases like that, Kirk is like, well, it's already been interfered with, so now we're gonna try to repair it. And in this episode, Dr. Cardigan does the same thing, where he's like, hell, well, they've already believed in God, so I guess we better go down and light a bush on fire and give them 10 commandments. Like that's immediately his response. And it surprises me that a social scientist, like his immediate response is just like, we got to give them a good religion. That's the answer to this.
Yeah. And it's like, which one would have been better? I don't know that I have a solid opinion on that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So as smart as these like Mintakans are, you have to imagine that this crazy situation is still going to get told, and it's going to become a legend in some ways, like whether or not it overcomes their tendency towards logic. Only the future can tell.
I think that like if they had gone the route of coming down and giving commandments and saying this is how you should do things, over time when they're gone and they're not there to remind them, there could still be things happening that are, making them translate it in ways that it wasn't intended. And like, oh, we need to make a sacrifice because it's raining or whatever, or not raining, but thundering. It's, shows that he's angry. Yeah. Because that's, kind of what they leapt to there. And so I think that might have been a worry of like, if we come down and just like play the God part, we're still maybe leaving room for these kind of like leaps and assumptions. Yeah.
It's a lot of responsibility, taking on that responsibility. I mean, that's literally what...
Like, when you feel the need to come back every once in a while and just be like, still here, what's up?
I guess, you'd have to, yeah. I mean, that's literally what the title of the episode is talking about. It reminds me, just to make another allusion, it reminds me of the science of psychohistory in Asimov's Foundation trilogy. It's their science of deterministically predicting the future and how to achieve the greatest good for the Foundation. And if that means that like some things get left off, a planet gets abandoned, it's for the good of what we are fairly certain is going to happen thanks to our data modeling. Asimov also has another example of, the 3 laws of robotics.
No.
3 laws of robotics state that a robot can't allow a human to come to harm through action or inaction. A robot must obey the laws or obey the orders of a human as long as they don't violate the first law. And the third law is that a robot has to protect itself as long as it doesn't violate the first 2 laws. And so that's fictional. Like they're not current like robot scientists are, working on AI, they're working on robots, and they're debating like whether that's even practical to have, because when you think about it, the first robots are probably going to be like military robots, right? You can't have a law in a military robot that says don't kill somebody.
Although the first robots arguably might do something way simpler and not even have human form, right? They might just be like making decisions in a production line.
Sure. Yeah. It won't be that like Sony robot that keeps falling down the stairs. Like we're not worried about that. Yeah. But the idea of the laws is that like they're designed to make robots servants to humanity. And of course, all of Asimov's stories study like our creation of an underclass of beings that are gaining intelligence. And very late in his robot stories, he came up with this idea of the zeroth law, which is the law that like robots' actions must contribute to the good of humanity, but it overrides the other laws because it's like the most primary law. And so that means that in certain cases, a robot could allow a human to come to harm through inaction or possibly action because they have the bigger picture of what is best for galactic human society going forward.
Sure, right. If that's their prime directive.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. Yeah. So I don't know if they stole that from Asimov, but it exists in other worlds.
Sure.
I think that Picard ultimately passes the moral test of the Prime Directive according to his own beliefs, because in the end, he's the one that's down there. He's facing the compound bow from Oshman Sporting Goods. You know, it's his life on the line here.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that part really funny. He's just like so willing to get shot and like maybe killed.
Yeah.
Like just that he's not a god. Like, couldn't you just like cut his finger and show that he's bleeding? Like, there's so many simpler ways that he could have showcased, like, I promise I'm living, this would hurt me, like, than to let this guy shoot him. Also, did you notice that, like, when Troy's about to get shot by this guy, she's surrounded by, like, 3 or 4 other Mintakans, including this dude's daughter. It's like, what if you're missing your daughter, dude? Like, there's no safety protocols here. What's happening?
Damn it, Bobby, get out of the way. Yeah. He's the William Tell of Mintakans, I guess. He's not worried about it.
There's simpler ways to do these things, yeah.
I want to talk about what I consider the real Picard maneuver, and that's showing a lady her home planet from space. This is the second of 4 times that Picard shows somebody their home planet from orbit. It happened in the first season episode Justice. It happened in First Contact, both the movie and the episode First Contact as well.
Oh, funny.
Yeah. It's sort of like, he talks, I think, in Insurrection about how, in his own experience, seeing Earth from space affected him and emotionally and changed him. And this is actually a real thing that happens to Earth astronauts called the overview effect. Many astronauts have talked about when they finally get into orbit and they see Earth, they see it as singular and fragile. And of course, the national boundaries are invisible from space. And Michael Collins, an Apollo 11 astronaut, said, quote, "The thing that really surprised me was that it," referring to Earth, "projected an air of fragility." And why, I don't know to this day. I had a feeling that it's tiny, it's shiny, it's beautiful, it's home, and it's fragile. They get this idea that, like, it needs to be protected, and they have more of a sort of global, they think more global.
Sure.
Which, I mean, if you're, flying around all the time in space, like, are the members of Starfleet, you must have that, you're mainlining that perspective, probably, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Also, tangent, do you ever wonder if, like, Kirk used that as, like, a pickup thing? I feel like if anyone would have, he would have.
In the episode, The Conscience of the King, he brings a lady to an observation deck, and he does show her, the ship and the outside, and yeah, he is kind of using it like that, so.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
All right.
I just think it's good that he doesn't, he shows her the planet and she doesn't say, "Oh, it's round. Uh-oh, that's going to be a problem."
Oh, yeah, interesting. I guess they don't say anything about what their assumptions are about Earth at this point, but you would think that they wouldn't necessarily know that.
Yeah.
Like,
well, OG is working on her sundial, so maybe she's already got the idea that there's a rotation involved and it's a globe.
She's a smart one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We see the duck blind in this episode. We also see it in Star Trek Insurrection. Again, like Riker going undercover, duck blinds never seem to work out.
Duck blind.
This is the the hidden facility where they are looking down, studying the Mintakans.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And I wonder if anthropologists wrestle with the ethics of studying indigenous tribes and, like, just looking at people living their lives, just checking them out.
I don't know. You'd think that, like, there might be some sort of invasion of privacy there. Yeah. But also, like, wouldn't you think that at this point in the future they would have, like, tiny cameras they could just, like, install throughout the forest or something? Like, you'd think that, like, they'd have more than a hologram cliff, like, going for them at this point.
I'll meet you by hologram cliff. Yeah, they didn't predict drones, I guess. Yeah, why wouldn't you just send a couple little drones down there to check them out?
Like, we could probably imagine something that we don't even have yet. Like, but because drones they might see, right? But maybe there's something that's like some sort of camera that's smaller that people wouldn't detect, or like a bird that's really a drone, or whatever. Like, I don't know. It seems like if you're going to imagine the future, you could imagine, like, a better way to observe people. But yeah, definitely I could see some concerns with privacy there.
Yeah. And having all these, we see I don't think we see this in later shows, but, like, the scientists are always old. And if that's fine, in this future, I'm sure that there's people live longer, there's more accessibility. And so, somebody who is like a learned doctor could go to a planet far from Earth and study people. But when things start popping off, like they should have like one young scientist who's like, maybe not so smart, but he works out a lot, so he can like turn the cranks and like carry people to safety. It's always just a bunch of old people in jumpsuits, and then something blows up, and the Enterprise just shows up, and everybody's just laying out on the ground, and things are bad.
Also, okay, when something goes wrong and you're trying to fix something at your home, if there's something weird going on with wiring, you turn you like shut off the breakers.
Yeah,
the whole
time. Yeah.
And do you notice that like Geordi is like fixing this, and there's just like sparks
just
everywhere.
Playing over everything. Yeah, turn the effing power off. Yeah.
Geordi must have been smart enough to know to do that.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, and the guy falls out the window, and they just lose him. Yeah.
Yeah, and that also just seems really like it's like he just tumbles.
Not a perfect mission. Crusher kind of blows it, and then she is unable to wipe the memory correctly, and mistakes were made all across the board.
Mistakes were made, yeah. Yeah.
Well, as we get to the end of the episode here, was there anything else that you wanted to say about this episode that we have left unsaid?
I also think it's worth mentioning that although Roddenberry was like tried to keep religion kind of out of the future, I think that Star Trek does this really good job at like, even though he thinks that it wouldn't maybe survive, it's not, except for, okay, this episode is the exception, actually, to what I was about to say, but it typically doesn't showcase it as like, this is stupid. It usually looks at it as like, okay, well, for the most part, they're respected, maybe they're viewed a bit more logically, like, okay, there's these beings, they exist, some people choose to worship them, others choose to acknowledge and coexist with them, and if they deserve it, they also give them kind of respect and look to them for advice. What I mean by if they deserve it, because there's, gods like, or when I say God, I mean like people with beings with a lot of powers. There's like the Tree Lane and who's just like effing with people. And so, so I think that even though he's trying to kind of keep it out of it, it's still like acknowledged, and it's still like kind of respected when people have these views, but it's just looked at of like in a little bit of a different way, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I respect his humanist beliefs all the way, but it was something that he was struggling with and working out a lot. And there's the famous story of his pitch for Star Trek: The Motion Picture. The climactic scene being Kirk in a fist fight with Jesus on the bridge of the Enterprise. Like,
wait, really?
Yes, like it was on surface level for him, the things that he was struggling with, which is endearing, but yeah, I think the end result of the Star Trek franchise and the tone of it is that nobody's going to discriminate anybody for anything. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. I think, the tone is very much a tone of like respect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, okay, I have a couple like just random notes I took during watching it because I'm like, okay, this is silly and funny.
Okay.
I think I've already kind of mentioned some of them, but yeah, seriously, in the beginning, that guy literally falls out the window for no reason. Yeah. Like, it's like he tossed himself out. Yeah. Like, it's very, like, that didn't need to happen.
Yeah.
Why did OG hide when her dad is hurt? Like, why is she just like, oh, you're hurt, I'm just gonna hide behind this rock?
She's
like,
scared.
And if someone's coming from nowhere, yeah, but I feel like she hides even before someone appears.
Yoink.
It's weird.
Yeah. That falling out of the window thing, like, I don't know Beamler and Manning's specific, like, religious backgrounds, but I felt like there were a couple things in this that were sort of religious allusions or, like, references. The guy falling out the window, like, famously, and I think Acts in the Bible, there's a man who is present at a sermon. He has to sit in the window because the room is full, and he falls out of the window and dies. And then I think it's Paul runs down and lays hands on him and like brings him back to life. And then also Ray Wise's character has a vest that is made of woven of fabric of all different colors, like a really fancy bath mat. And it evoked to me the idea of Joseph and his coat of many colors, his Technicolor dream coat. Yeah.
I can start singing that song for you right now.
Sure.
No, it's okay.
And Ray Wise's character, Liko, is himself somebody who is they're talking about the dreams that he's having, and he's trying to interpret these dreams. So, I mean, I think that's clearly a biblical allusion.
Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have picked that up.
What I want to know is the Vulcan haircut genetic?
Seriously,
because these people have no connection to Vulcans or Romulans. Does proto-Vulcan hair only grow to fringe level, to the eyebrows, and then it doesn't grow any farther?
Are they supposed to be related somehow? Or
yeah, they're supposed to be like,
really...
nobody knows how they got there, but they do say that they're a proto-Vulcan culture, and so somehow they are related to Vulcans and Romulans.
Their hair just stops in a certain place.
It must.
Stops,
yeah,
knows that it's gotten there.
It just they are cursed genetically to have mullets. That's just the way it is.
Oh man, yeah, that doesn't seem natural.
It's unnatural.
But then again, like a bunch of humanoids like developing across many planets also isn't all that natural. So
no,
like,
no, I don't.
Whatever.
Know how that
We've already accepted that.
Yeah.
So why not accept the haircut?
Well, let's talk. My space dad can beat up your space dad. Who's your favorite captain and why?
That is such a hard question. So my favorite series of all time is Deep Space Nine, like by a million.
Yeah.
And I think Sisko's really great, but you can't deny that Picard is also really. Like so many of them have like different reasons why they're great. But I would say my top two. I'm gonna settle on top two would be Sisko and Picard.
As
also amazing, see, it gets hard.
Yeah. As a captain who certainly takes his own counsel and goes his own way, how do you think that Sisko might have dealt with this situation?
How would he have dealt with this situation? That's a good question. How do you think he would have dealt with this situation?
Oh, turnabout. Sisko is an
on it more, but...
Sisko is an excellent delegator, so I think maybe we should be asking how Kira and Dax, might deal with this situation.
Sure.
And with Kira and Dax, you have a super long-lived scientist, and you've got a passionate, revolutionary, faithful, devout person. So, I don't know. Actually, I'm trying to think now if they ever kind of tackled something like this on DS9, because that sounds like a good episode.
I think he almost certainly wouldn't have tried to just leave the dude, I think, to die.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. But, you were talking about how Sisko's a really good delegator. Actually, so, a few years ago, a bit of a tangent, but I swear it circles back.
Okay.
When I was first starting my career in data science, I did my first data viz project I ever did was I created this web app. I scraped all of the Star Trek episodes that existed at the time and the movies. And I created this web app where people could select any combination of episodes or movies they wanted. And then they could look at kind of the network diagram of that output of that specific selection that they selected. So someone actually wrote an article. They played around with it and wrote this article, which I can send you the link to. But it's like they were looking at, if you just look at each show separately, that almost all shows have the captain as a very large central node, whereas Deep Space Nine was different, and that there's Sisko is one of the central, but so is Kira and Bashir and Quark and all of these other characters. So that show is a lot less captain centric.
Yeah.
It has all these other people who have very important parts to play. Kira is very much in a very central part to the political storyline, and Quark is kind of the social life as the bartender, the social connector between people. And anyway, I thought that was interesting because I never really thought about it, but that relates to what you just said about he's a good delegator and relies on the strengths of other people.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is that like a JavaScript thing that's scraping all that data?
I used Python at the time. Okay. Yeah, but unfortunately, I'll have to caveat this with, it was on my old job's website, and they were acquired by IDEO, and it's not online anymore. And I keep meaning to put it back online myself. and I just haven't. So unfortunately, I can't be like, yeah, check out this thing I made.
Well,
it's not online currently, but maybe I can work hard to get it up, and I can let you know.
Let me know. Let me know if you do. There's a site online. I don't want to say their name because I'm not exactly sure how this is legal, but there's a site online that has transcripts of every episode of the franchise, including some of the movies. And I would love to do that sort of process with that site and find out what the most used words in the franchise are, eliminating, articles and conjunctions and things like that.
I would bet I use the same website, and I would bet I have that data.
Okay.
They don't have everything, right? They when I did it, they didn't have. I don't know if they had the reboot movies, and I don't know if they ever added any of the newer shows like Discovery, Lower Decks, and things like that. But yeah,
interesting.
Yeah.
I bet it would be should.
Me on later if you want.
I bet the most used word would be should, because they're always saying if I change the polarity flow, it should. But it's okay, is it going to do it or not? I don't want should. Come on, if I was a captain, I'd be telling my officers not to say should, and it could be all the time.
Sure. When I first scraped the data, I was trying to think of what other that actually is the data I used to do the thing with Wesley Crusher, to figure out how many lines he had.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But also another thing I played around with, but I never really posted anything about was let's just test the grade level, because there's libraries where you can feed in some text and it'll tell you the grade level associated with the words used, right?
Oh, okay.
And I was I just want to see if Spock actually would have a higher grade level in what he says, based on what he says. And he did. I forget exactly what the results were, but he did have the words he used put him in a higher level than the people around him. So I'm okay, that's nice.
Now that we've reached the end of the show, you'll receive a commission and the rank of ensign. What department on the ship do you work in?
Yeah, I would say I am I know that I'd have a blue shirt. I'd be in science, scientific officer, but I don't know exactly. Yeah, I don't know. Where in Star Trek would be the best for data stuff?
Yeah, see, we'd never see that on the show because they didn't anticipate that data science would be important. But definitely just the churning through the amazing amount of scientific data that they're always, taking in, I guess. There'd be personnel data. There must be millions, if not billions, of Starfleet employees. And so just getting them the services that they need and paychecks if they get those. And,
sure. I might be a little bit more behind the scenes. I might be creating things to help them make decisions. That's what I've done at some of the jobs I've had. Sure. I actually thought about this recently, which shirt would I have? Because my brother-in-law is an artist, and I was I really want you to draw me as a Lower Decks character, and then put me into some scenes with Lower Decks characters for my Twitter banner and my Facebook banner and stuff. Sure. So he did. And so I had to think about, what shirt do I want to be wearing? Yeah. And so see if you look at my Twitter or whatever, that I'm wearing my blue Star Trek uniform in Lower Deck style.
So definitely blue then. And if anybody asks, you can just, a little this, little that. But definitely blue. Well, Ensign Pettit, thanks for talking to me about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, they can at EISTPOD on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I would say Twitter as well. I am at MollsMP. Let me spell you that. Sure. Let me spell that for you. It is MollzMP.
People can go check that out. Thanks again, and we are signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.
Okay, Caliban, are you prepared to take your Sailor Noob graduation quiz?
Hey, Hana, I'm so prepared for this. I learned fluent Japanese.
Impressive.
Arigato gozaimasu.
First question. The hero of Sailor Moon is Usagi Tsukino. What does Usagi mean in Japanese?
Rabbit.
Correct.
Yes.
Next question. As Sailor Moon, Usagi and the Sailor Scouts live and go to school in what Tokyo neighborhood?
Easy. Azubu Juban.
That's right. One more correct answer and you'll no longer be a Sailor Noob. The human form of the Cardian Leshy is tasked by Aelin Ann to gather life energy. What Japanese historical period are Leshy's human forms closed from?
What?
I'm sorry, the answer was the Heian period.
Bacana!
Better luck next time. But for all the answers, listen to Sailor Noob, where we discuss the food, fashion, and culture of Sailor Moon, wherever you get your podcasts.
私は恥ずかしい。
可愛いものなん